Hello and welcome to today's live chat, which is coming from Wrocław, Poland. This is a live, so I would request that people, as always, keep the language appropriate. But the problem with walking around was there was too much wind outside, and I thought people would only complain at the racket. Today I'm going to talk about the Battle of Bautzen at the end of April 1945. The reason I'm talking about the Battle of Bautzen is because it's linked to what is happening right now. I believe that if we can see the links between what happened in history to what's happening today. And yesterday there was a major Russian defeat in Lyman in eastern Ukraine. For those of you who have followed the advances of the Ukrainian army in the past month or so, you will notice some places which were pretty important in the Second World War. For example, Izium, when we have the Battle of Kharkov of 1942, or the attempt to retake Kharkov in 1942, Izium played a major part in that. A really absurd attack by the Red Army, in my opinion. The reason I decided to do Bautzen was because I don't know enough about Lyman to actually talk about. In fact, I only know what's actually being said on the news. So therefore, I thought that this was a really good thing to actually discuss. Now, if you look at the map of the German A4 motorway, you will see the towns which I am going to mention in this talk. On the April the 20th, 1945, it was Hitler's birthday. And if you've seen the film Untergang, Downfall, then you'll know what steps that was going on in the bunker. This film is very historically accurate. Now, unfortunately, I do need a map, and I'll do this in some detail in a different video with maps and things. But to go back to the German A4 motorway where it is today, there was an attack by the Red Army in the what is today along the axis of the A4 motorway. And so, obviously, the bulk of Soviet forces were facing Berlin. Indeed, if you ask anybody what they did in the Second World War, it's a bit late now for most people, if you ask them what they did in the Second World War, they always pretend they were in Berlin. In fact, there were so many people in Berlin, there can't have been anybody anywhere else. What happened was that it was Polish formations within the Red Army. What the Red Army did as it advanced into Poland, it forcibly recruited people who were often themselves then just used as cannon fodder. We can see this, for example, whilst the Warsaw Uprising took place in September 1944, there was an attempt to cross the Vistula River, and this was done using farmers which had been forcibly recruited into the Soviet army, so peasants, if you like, maybe not farmers, because they were just farm hands, largely. And then they were effectively just massacred because there was no point in making an attack which was not covered. Now, at the time of the Battle of Bautzen, these were Soviet, it was the Soviet army, but the units involved were largely Polish. They were people forcibly recruited, and they had next to no training, of course, because this is what the forcible recruitment does to people. The person in charge was one Karol Sierczewski. He had actually participated in the Spanish Civil War. He was born in a working class family in 1897 in Warsaw, but he'd never lived in independent Poland. So he became a Bolshevik. He spent all his life in the Soviet Union. This was quite normal. It's not unusual for people to have been born, for example, in Poland somewhere, and then end up in the Soviet Union, either for ideological reasons or because of the way borders changed and people were refugees and then they ended up staying wherever they were. So Sierczewski had taken place in a number of battles in the Spanish Civil War, including Brunete, Ebro, and others. But what he liked was the odd drink now and again. In fact, the odd drink now and again became worse and worse and worse. Indeed, the Spanish government forces wanted to get rid of the international brigades because of the amount that they were so badly led, and he was one of the leaders. And part of the problem with the international brigades in Spain, the casualties, obviously to a large extent was done because of unprofessionalism, but also it was people like Sierczewski and other Stalinist officers who tried to get take control and were totally unsuited to the job. Now, to return to Bautzen, what happened is that the Polish, or Soviet really, I mean Soviet forces using Polish forced soldiers, conscripts, crossed the Nisa River approximately where the border is today, and then they advanced towards Dresden. That's a distance of 100 kilometers. So they were advancing. Now, certainly in a situation where the battlefield is very fluid, you say you just keep advancing, don't worry too much about what's happening behind you. I didn't give you the orders to stop, you keep going. Let me worry about the flanks. I can't remember who that's a quote from. But Sierczewski sort of thought like this. He'd want the glory of capturing Dresden, for example. Now, if you look at a map, you will see to the south of the A4 today, there are mountains, and these mountains sort of divided where the front could be. So that's what Czechoslovakia then, or occupied Czechoslovakia then, Czechia today. Sudetenland, if you like. So this sort of broke up the Soviet front. Now, to the south of the A4, the line of advance, was General Schörner, one of Hitler's favorite generals. He was a person who actually went around hanging people who he didn't think were putting up a good enough fight. Indeed, he would even go around hanging people who, for example, there's one case I know of where a vehicle had broken down, and the officer ordered them to take it back to a repair station. And instead of the vehicle coming back repaired, Schörner had the driver hanged for leaving the front lines. And that was just the one case I can say, but there's lots and lots of like that. Schörner, obviously, I think goes out saying what Schörner did at the end of the war. He just cleared off and left his soldiers in a mess. But that's another story. So, but what Schörner did was he attacked from the south of the region of Bautzen and in various places. Now, in a battle lasting 10 days, that's, they say, until the 30th of April, this was a major victory for Nazi Germany. That is to say, whilst Berlin was completely surrounded, Schörner was having these victories in the south. Now, whether or not, I've heard people state that this was an attempt really to sort of capture Berlin. If you look at the map again, you can see that's totally ridiculous. Berlin's 300 kilometers away. And not only that, there was no way they had fuel. Excuse me. And, but it was the fact that these victories actually happened. Why did they happen? Well, obviously, somebody like Sierczewski or anybody else, Patton or whoever it could have been, would have just kept advancing But the difference between this, for example, the sort of the American army or the German army was this: is that their supplies would keep coming in, but there it's a Soviet army, and they just couldn't care less. They didn't bother with the supplying the people who were going forward. I mean, it could also be argued, and I think there is a very good argument here, that they were using Polish soldiers who had even less value than Soviet citizens had to them, so they didn't care. I wouldn't go so far as to say that the Soviet high command did this deliberately, because at least they did one thing. Now, Shirchevsky, who was known to like the odd drink, down again as I mentioned, spent most of the battle under the influence of drink. He was totally plastered. So he was effectively out of it. But what the German attacks did do is they broke through the lines of communication, broke the Soviet Union into small packets, which they then eliminated. Bautzen was recaptured in several days of street fighting, and this effectively ended this attack on Dresden. Dresden stayed in German hands until the end of the Second World War, as did Bautzen, which was recaptured. It was not captured again by the Soviets, of course, then once there was the capitulation, and then the Soviets just walked in normally, because there was no troops there left anymore. So what I think about this battle, and I will do a longer piece on this battle, because there's a couple of massacres which took place. There was one where, for example, the Soviet troops murdered in a barn between 100 and 300 Volkssturm, which they'd taken prisoner. And a bit later, on one of the main roads, there was a Polish medical convoy which was being pulled out, and everybody but one person was murdered by this SS unit. The strange thing about it, of course, is those of the Germans who were attacking were largely themselves made up of Volkssturm, although there was the Hermann Göring division and one SS division there as well. So now the point of all of this is that there are so many similarities with the situation that we see today in Ukraine. You've got people forced into the Kremlin's army, whether they want to be there or not. Total lack of respect for the soldiers on the ground by the officers, those in command, and failure to supply them with things that they need, including food and basic weaponry. But above all, I think it's food which is the thing which is important in this. As far as Bautzen is concerned, this is the second biggest battle in which, hello Colin, in which the Polish troops took part in the Second World War. The biggest battle is the Battle of Bautzen, which took place in September 1939. So it's the second biggest for Polish troops. It's the last victory of Nazi Germany. And so it's a battle which next to nothing is, I wouldn't say known, that's not fair, otherwise if next to nothing were known, I wouldn't know it, would I? But the amount of, there is some archival stuff on it, and I have had sent to me some stuff, materials on it. When I was in Bautzen 2 years ago, I actually met somebody and said, well, we'll go around the battlefields together, and I wrote a list of the things. Then I got something related to my day job, and that was the end of that one. But I will go and do this again in the future. I'm in Bautzen at least twice a year, so this is something I find particularly interesting and curious. So anyway, so that was today's little chat. I hope you found that of interest. I'm going to try and do things when in my live broadcast. I like to do things which are related to history as it reflects on the current state. And we've got another daft comment here. So NATO started this conflict because they broke the Minsk agreements. Yeah, of course they did, and offered NATO membership to Russia's neighbours contrary to the Minsk agreement. This is utter nonsense. This is just Kremlin troll here. For example, NATO doesn't offer membership to anybody. You have to apply for it. And so therefore, it's like, for example, we saw that Ukraine applied for NATO membership when was it? 2 days ago. It has to apply. NATO doesn't apply to countries, so the countries have to ask. Finland and had to ask, for example, and then NATO decide. It's an application procedure. It's like if you get a job. Now, as for NATO country, the Minsk Agreement, this is I mean, this is just typical neo-Nazi Kremlin propaganda and nothing else. So anyway, good. So thanks for those of you who are here this morning, and so I'll do more things related to the conflict in Ukraine, as it is also as we can see similar things from history. Let's not forget that the current Kremlin regime is the successor state to the former Bolshevik regime, and the crimes committed by the Bolshevik regime, which are now completely whitewashed, if not denied by the Kremlin today. So those who are brave organizations such as Memoriam and others in Russia who can now find themselves arrested for reporting on Stalinist crimes. So let's not forget that not only neo-Nazi, but they're also the successors of the Bolsheviks. So when we see a Kremlin troll with a hammer and sickle with a line through it, let's not forget that that person is effectively also in the same camp as Stalin and would have been on Stalin's side at the time. So thanks for everybody, for those of you who watched today. I shall do a longer video on this subject sometime with maps, because I don't think it's good me telling you to get your road atlas out and have a look at where Bautzen is and other places, and Dresden and the Nisse River, or Neisse River if you like in German. Thanks for being here, and all the best from me in Wrocław, Poland.